for joining me for tonight's journey into Sasquatch Valley. Now, tonight's story is another one of those stories that kind of makes you wonder, just what does a Sasquatch know and understand? In this case, does it understand the strong instincts that arise in most humans when they hear a baby cry? Maybe, maybe not. How about you have a listen and decide for yourself? My name is Clay. I'm 52 now, but this happened when I was about 24. Now, back then, I was working for a small timber outfit based out of Mena, Arkansas. We were doing a clear-cut job way out past the last paved road in the Ouachita Mountains. And you couldn't even get a cell signal up there, not that we had them at that time. All we had was a CB radio, a cooler with some drinks and some food, and thermoses to keep our coffee hot. We were 5 guys on a expected-to-be 2-week-long job. It was me, a guy named Bo who could sharpen a chainsaw blindfolded, and 3 greenhorns just there trying to make a buck. I had worked with Bo before, but not the other 3. We were going to haul in the pop-up campers and sleep on site to save fuel and daylight. The nights there were very quiet, sometimes a little too quiet. On the second night of the first week, we heard something that none of us could explain. It was after a supper of beans and some canned ham over the fire. We were all smoking our after-supper cigarettes and talking when it started. A cry. Not just any cry, but a baby's cry. It was the sound of a newborn baby, that thin and breathy kind of cry. I knew that sound, having just watched my first child come into the world, take its first breath and let out its first thin cries just the year before. It's a sound that every parent knows and never forgets, and it's one that will make you react. That sound shut us all up very quick. We just sat there, ears cocked toward the sound in the dark. Then one of the greenhorns broke the silence with a chuckle and said, some bobcat must have just had kittens. Now the cries went on a little longer, and we let it go. I had never heard bobcat kittens before, but I had heard big cat screams that sound like a woman, so I figured he must be right. That's all it was. But then we heard it again the next night. Same sound, coming from the same spot, just out of sight past the edge of our work zone, where the trees still stood thick. There was more talk about what it was and what it wasn't. Bo said it was probably a fox kit, but he didn't sound convinced. Some of the new guys didn't look convinced either. One of them, his name was Reese, he said it gave him the creeps, and he was going to sleep in his truck from then on. We laughed and poked fun and called him a baby, but I did notice that the rest of us stayed very close to the campers that night, myself included. Then on the 4th night, things changed. The crying, it came again, but this time it moved. It started northeast of our camp and moved in a slow circle around us, staying just out of our line of sight. And it was moving much too fast for a child of any age, and what we heard as it walked, it was much too fast and sounded too big for the animals that we were thinking it could have been. It would let loose several long, whining cries. Then it would stop for a few minutes. We could hear it move. We could almost track it in the dark by the sound. Then it would stop, and then it would start again. Always that awful baby crying sound. If you're a parent, you know it grates on your nerves, especially when you can't stop it. Reese would not come out of his truck at all that night. He locked the doors and pulled his sleeping bag over his head. That was an unsettling night. Once or twice we said we should go out there and find out what it was once and for all. We talked a big game. but none of us moved. It finally stopped that night around 2 a.m. We tried to sleep, but I can't speak for the others. I only know I didn't get much sleep. In the morning, we found we had quite the surprise. One of our coolers, the big blue Coleman with the locking lid, was gone. Just gone. Now, the ice for this cooler had just been replenished the afternoon before by Reese when we sent him into town for more drinks. So it was full and heavy. It was also so big that we couldn't keep it in the campers at night. You couldn't walk around. So this cooler was just gone. There were no drag marks, no raccoon mess left behind. It had vanished as if it had never been there. That cooler weighed probably 40 or 50 pounds, maybe more. It was full of our food and drinks, and it was big. Reese had just been to town, as I said, and he replenished all the food, drinks, and packed it high with ice. So it was very full and very heavy. If it had been something, say, like a bear, we probably would have heard it. This cooler was on the back of the lead truck, which was parked by the larger of the two pop-up campers, as in me and Bo slept in that one. That meant that whatever took it had walked right into our camp, right up close to our campers as we slept, lifted the cooler out of the truck without making a sound, and walked off with it. After some searching, Bo found it about 70 yards out from our camp. The lid had been ripped off. It was completely separated from the rest of the cooler. The first thing I noticed, there were no claw marks or prints of any kind on the cooler, but most of our food was missing. They left the drinks, however. Now, there were no marks or prints of any kind on the cooler, but we also noticed something else. There was no food mess scattered about, no packages chewed or ripped open. The times I've seen an animal get into coolers, they always leave a mess of packages half chewed through and bits of food around everywhere. But not here. This was a clean area. Only the cooler was damaged. We all looked around, but none of us said much. But I know we were all thinking there was something very wrong with this. Now, this was Friday morning, and technically we could have knocked off for Saturday and Sunday and pick up working on Monday again, as they didn't expect us to work through the weekend. But we had a quick huddle that afternoon, and we all agreed that with good weather we were going to work through the weekend and hopefully get out of there a few days early. None of us wanted to stay any longer than necessary. That night, I decided to stay up. I sat in a folding chair with my dad's old pump shotgun across my lap. Bo laughed when he looked at me before he went into the camper to sleep. He said, "You look like you're some dad pissed off and waiting for his daughter to come home after curfew." Well, maybe I did. I wasn't scared, but I was uneasy. Nothing about this felt right or normal. By my figuring, if some cougar was out there prowling around, I could run it off before it got the pop-up campers, which their screened-in walls were no defense against a cougar's claws. I had been sitting there for quite a while. I remember it was a bit chilly, and I had been keeping the fire stoked up high and kept it fed with a lot of wood. But at some point, the inevitable happened. I dozed off. I woke up, startled and panicked because I knew I had dozed off. I saw that the fire was now all but gone, just red coals covered with some ash. The night was dead quiet around me. But something had woke me up, and then I heard it, that baby cry. And it was close, closer than it had ever been. Sounded like it was at the trees just past our work zone and camp area, so that was about 50 feet behind our campers. We set up that way for the shelter of the trees from the winds, and we thought it would shelter our campers during the day from the sun. We also knew we weren't going to work out that way, so we could just leave the camper set up right there. Seemed like a good decision at the time. Had always worked out for us before. But the trees, they were very close there. Too close now that I think on it. The hair was standing up on the back of my neck. Visibility was low, but my eyes were adjusting to the low light after waking up. Something was there, I knew it. I stood up from the chair slowly. As I did, that baby cry came again, and I swear to you, it was much closer now. I looked hard into the darkness all around, but I couldn't see anything. The thought to build up the fire came and went. I wasn't putting down my gun. I didn't want to be vulnerable. I didn't have the time. The baby cry was still going as I stood up. I flicked the safety off and pumped the shotgun. The cry cut off immediately, and there was nothing but silence. Now, you won't believe it, but that silence was worse to me than hearing the baby cry. "Clay, we good out there?" I heard Bo's whisper from the camper behind me. I said one word back. "No." I heard the soft click as the camper door opened and closed, and Bo stepped out and came to stand beside me. I told you that Bo could sharpen a chainsaw blindfolded, and I mean that. So let me tell you some other things about Bo. He was older than me, more experienced, and if you've ever imagined what a real lumberjack would look like, that's Bo. Just skip the beard and the crazy knit hat. He was a big guy. He was solid, and I don't mean just physically. He was just confident and sure. He'd been doing this job a long time. So when he came to stand next to me with his rifle, I sure felt better. I was still young, remember, probably 10 years younger than him. I wasn't as solid as Bo, but I was getting there. I whispered and brought Bo up to speed with what had happened. I was relieved to see he had his rifle. Good. He was a heck of a shot with it. I'd seen him in action before. Bo quietly told me to keep watch. He was going to add wood to the fire and get it going again. And he did. As the fire came up, I could see farther out from where we stood. A couple of high flames in a row. And I thought I saw something. Or rather, I saw a silhouette, the hint of what was there in the darkness of the shadow, just out of reach of the flame's light. Bo had finished by this time, and I whispered to him, "Get the flashlight." But Bo already had the flashlight, brought it out with him. I heard the sound of a Velcro tab pull opening on one of his pockets. I heard a click, and the area lit up with bright white light. But it was pointing all in the wrong direction. I reached over and grabbed Bo's wrist and moved it so the light pointed where I had seen that silhouette. And it was right there. It suddenly closed its eyes against the bright light and held up an arm to shield its face. I saw that it was squatting just at the edge of our camp area. Its squat looked like a catcher at a ball game. Knees drawn higher than a human's, though. One arm was still resting down around the legs, its long fingers brushing the ground, while the other had been raised to protect its face, showing just the back of its arm to us. It was covered in dark hair everywhere that I saw. I'll call the color brownish or brownish-black, but it could have been either in the daylight. In that squatted position, I saw that its shoulders were the widest part of its body, sticking out much farther past its knees, and they were wider than any man I have ever seen. But what I really remember was the flash that I caught of the eyes just before it brought its arm up to cover its face. Those eyes, they were reflective. They had animal eyeshine to them. Now, raccoon eyeshine is a bright yellow, and deer's is greenish. The color I saw was a mix of those two, a pale, sickly greenish-yellow color. I have never seen eyeshine that color before, and I can tell you most animals' eyeshine colors, because in the last 30-odd years, I think I've seen most of them that roam the United States. But I've never seen this, not before then, and not since then. And the eyes were set very wide apart. That's how I knew this wasn't someone in a mask trying to play with us. It really didn't like the light. That much was clear. We were in a stalemate because it wasn't moving and we weren't moving. "Would you look at that?" I heard Bo say. Yeah, I was looking at it, but I couldn't even respond. Then it opened its mouth. I could see part of it that wasn't blocked by its arm. But it opened its mouth, and I heard softly that baby crying sound, like it was afraid to go full force right in front of us. But we saw it make the sound, so mystery solved in one way, I guess. That was no bobcat or fox kit or anything else we tried to say it was over the last week. It was right there, in front of us. A Sasquatch. A bona fide Sasquatch. I'd heard stories over the years, but I always ignored them, snickered and passed over them. What a bunch of hooey, I always thought. Well, I certainly don't think that anymore. Then it stood up and turned and walked quickly toward the uncut zone of trees. Bo followed it with the flashlight, keeping it lit up as far as we could. When it was gone, we heard the baby cry several more times out in the darkness. But comfortingly, each time it sounded a little farther away. Then Bo says to me, "Clay, you know what that was, right? You saw what I saw, didn't you?" Of course I saw what he saw, but I got it. He needed to hear me say it, so I said, "Yeah, I did. I saw that Sasquatch." Me and Bo sat up for the rest of the night, neither of us sleeping. We worked the next day, and both of us were terribly exhausted. That morning, though, when the others got up, we did tell them what we had seen. Now remember, Reese had taken to sleeping in his truck long before that night, while the other two slept in the second pop-up camper. Reese, though, was the only one who believed us. After breakfast, Reese quietly came and told me and Bo that he had seen the Sasquatch from his truck a couple nights prior. He woke up that night because something was bumping his truck. His story was pretty quick and disjointed, and it's basically just that he got woke up by the Sasquatch while he was sleeping in his truck. Then it made sense because we had noticed earlier in the week that he was a lot more jumpy during the day and didn't seem to be sleeping well, but we passed it off. The thing is, all that mattered is that he believed us, and he told us why, and in return, we believed him. That night, me, Bo, and Reese decided to sit up and take turns on watch. Reese said he'd take the first watch. He knew that we had been up all night the night before, and he wanted to let us sleep. Lordy, did we appreciate that. Then I took watch, and then Bo. We heard the baby cry a few times in the night, but there was nothing close. On Sunday night, heading into Monday morning, we heard something very different. First, we heard those baby crying sounds. Then, in another direction, we heard long, whooping kinds of noises. I didn't know them for what they were at the time. We got our work done early on Monday. We wanted to be done with that job, and we were. We had pushed ourselves hard Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. We were pushing 16-hour days. We were watching each other's backs, barely sleeping, doing whatever we had to do to get done as early as possible. We pulled out of there Tuesday afternoon, 3.5 days early. Now, we didn't see the Sasquatch again, but once was enough. Our employers were absolutely thrilled with how fast we had gotten things done. The one foreman didn't believe it and went out to check for himself. And don't you know, they offered us another stint in that area with the promise of a big bonus if we got it done that fast again. No way. Not one of us took it. Now, two of the greenhorns that didn't see the Sasquatch, they might not have seen it, but they knew and felt that something was very off about that area. Even they wouldn't go back, no matter how much money was being offered, no matter how hungry they were for it. I got out of that line of work later that year. I worked 2 more buzz cuts, and that was it. I don't think I slept a wink on either of them. I left, and I have never looked back. But to this day, I still can't stand hearing a baby cry. Not because of the baby. Well, I think you know why. Well, folks, they say that Bigfoot makes many different vocalizations and calls, and that each one means something, just as our own vocalizations do. But how can we ever know what they mean? Well, folks, I don't know. I think that's something we'll have to decide for ourselves. Okay, going forward, folks, I just have a couple little things. I'm going to tell you a little bit of housekeeping. First, many of you might have already seen the community post I made a few days ago, but there is now a version of Buckeye Bigfoot up on many podcast platforms. I know a lot of you have asked for it. It's easier to download a couple of podcasts and take them to go instead of using up all your data and Wi-Fi and listening to YouTube. I get it. Now, I still haven't been hooked up to Apple yet, but I am on many other platforms. If you look up here, you can see all the different platforms I'm on. I'm on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and many more. I'm actually based on Spreaker, and I'll put the link to that one below in the video description. Now, at this point, just for your information, I'm releasing the podcast versions usually the day after the YouTube version is uploaded. So I put up YouTube on Tuesday and Friday. Right now, my podcast will probably go up Wednesday and Saturday. In the future, I want to make it the same night, but I just don't have the whole system down to do that yet, and I'm getting there. Anyway, folks, thanks for staying with me because I greatly would appreciate your support in the podcast world. It's just as tough, maybe tougher, starting out there in the podcast world like it is here on YouTube. So if you do hop on that podcast, if you have the ability, some do and some don't, please give me a like and a subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Now, the second and last thing is, I did mean to mention this last Friday, but coming up this October is the Spirit of the Bigfoot Festival, and it's up at the Mercer County Fairgrounds here in Ohio. I would advise you go ahead and get your tickets now before they're all sold out. Now, I'm going to be there, and so will be many other people that you would probably recognize, such as Neoma Finn. She'll be there, and Wayne from the Bigfoot Report will also be there. I think Russell Accord is also speaking there. There's a whole lineup. You can check it out on their website. I'll put that website also in the video description below. Anyway, this is the second year for this festival, and last year was a blast. I do hope to see you there. If you're going to be there, let me know in advance. I'd love to know who you are when you come up and say hello. It's hard to put the YouTube names to faces. All right, folks, listen. Again, thank you for listening in tonight. If you've enjoyed this story and have one of your own, please send it in to contact@buckeyebigfoot.com. I'm Nance Warren, and until we meet up again, always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. Thanks for listening.